The invitation had arrived on parchment so thick it felt like cured leather, smelling faintly of salt and something else. Something mineral, like wet stone. It promised an archive, a trove of forgotten lore from a family whose roots burrowed deep into the very bedrock of a desolate coastal town. Oakhaven. The name itself was a sigh of wind, a whisper of waves against a distant shore. For Reid, a man whose life revolved around the dusty silence of overlooked histories, it was an irresistible summons. My reclusive nature often kept me tethered to my own quiet studies, but the sheer scale of the Blackwood collection, hinted at in the oddly formal correspondence, stirred a different kind of hunger within me. A profound academic craving to piece together fragments of a world long vanished. The air, devoid of the usual frantic hum of travel, felt thin, as if the oxygen had been partially withdrawn. My footsteps echoed, a solitary rhythm in a space designed for multitudes, a stark counterpoint to the vibrant, teeming cities I usually avoided. It was a fitting prelude, I mused, to the isolation I was about to embrace. From there, a series of smaller flights, then a rented sedan. The landscape outside the window slowly shedding its verdant green for a muted palette of grays and browns. As I neared Oakhaven, the road narrowed, twisting through skeletal stands of pines that clawed at the perpetually overcast sky. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of brine and something else. Something earthy and deep, like churned silt. A low, persistent fog, a living shroud, began to unfurl from the unseen ocean, tendrils reaching across the asphalt, blurring the distinction between land and sky. No children played in the yards, no figures lingered on porches. Oakhaven, even from its periphery, felt less like a town and more like a collection of abandoned husks, slowly being reabsorbed by the encroaching wild. My tires on the damp pavement seemed to sing the only tune, a low, consistent hum that I found myself subconsciously trying to suppress. It was an unsettling quiet, a quiet that implied a holding of breath, a waiting. I was determined, yes, but even my scholarly resolve could not entirely dismiss the shiver that traced its way down my spine. Finally, the road curved sharply, rising slightly, and there it was, Blackwood Manor. It stood sentinel on a rocky promontory, a monolithic silhouette against the turbulent gunmetal gray of the bay. The fog, thicker here, swirled around its base, making the ancient stone walls appear to float, detached from the earth. A rusted, ornate iron gate, depicting a stylized gnarled tree, stood ajar, groaning faintly on its hinges in the imperceptible breeze. The drive wound its way through overgrown, untended gardens, where ancient, twisted rhododendrons grew in wild profusion, their leaves slick with moisture. Moss clung to everything. The stone balustrades, the forgotten statuary, the very air itself seemed to carry its green decay. The manor wasn't merely old. It felt profoundly weary, as if it had endured centuries of relentless burdens. A single, small, leaded glass window, high in one of the gables, seemed to catch a sliver of the fading light, glinting like a watchful eye. The air, heavy with salt and decay, also carried a faint metallic tang I couldn't quite place, a scent that hinted at something ancient and long buried. This was not merely an archival project. This was an immersion, a descent. And as I reached for the heavy brass knocker, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that Oakhaven had already begun its slow, insidious work. The journey had been a blur of transitions, each leg shedding another layer of the familiar world, leaving me increasingly untethered. I remembered, with a strange clarity, an empty airport concourse with motionless escalators, their ridged steps frozen mid-ascent. The silence there had been profound, a premonition of the deeper quiet that awaited me in Oakhaven. The Blackwood Manor, a hulking silhouette against the perpetually bruised sky, held its breath over the bay. Within its walls, the library was a mausoleum of forgotten voices, a vast chamber where dust reigned supreme. The air itself was a thick, textured thing, a tapestry woven from the scent of decaying paper, dry leather, and a faint, persistent mineral tang that I couldn't quite place. Perhaps the sea, perhaps something older, deeper. Light, grudgingly admitted through tall, grimy windows, fractured into hesitant shafts, illuminating galaxies of motes that danced in the heavy stillness. Shelves, carved from dark, unyielding wood, ascended to a vaulted ceiling, their contents a chaotic jumble of volumes, scrolls, and bound ledgers, all coated in a uniform, gray velvet of accumulated time. My breath hitched, not from exertion, but from the sheer, overwhelming promise of it all. This was more than an archive. It was a wilderness, untamed and ripe for exploration. My reclusive nature had always found solace in such places, in the quiet communion with the past. Here, I would not merely catalog, I would excavate. I began, methodically, with the closest stack, a precarious tower of leather-bound journals. My initial work was precise, almost ritualistic, carefully dusting each volume, noting its approximate age, its binding, its general subject matter. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light outside and the growing ache in my back. The silence was absolute, save for the whisper of pages, the rustle of my own movements, and the distant rhythmic moan of the foghorn from the bay. It was in a small, unassuming volume, its cover warped and its spine cracked, that the first fissure appeared in the calm surface of my academic pursuit. Titled simply Ledger of the Blackwood Line, 1789-1812. It promised a tedious catalog of births, deaths, and property transfers. But as I turned its brittle pages, a peculiar entry caught my eye. Amidst the neat copperplate script detailing harvests and land deeds, a single page, seemingly out of place, was filled with a different hand, scratchy and hurried, almost desperate. The tide takes, and the tide gives back, but what it gives is never truly ours. This was no accounting entry. The language was archaic, yes, but the sentiment was jarringly out of sync with the pragmatic records surrounding it. I checked the date. October 27th, 1799. A quick flip through the preceding and succeeding pages showed a return to mundane financial records, as if the strange entry had never existed. It was an anomaly, a rogue wave in a sea of calm data. Driven by a nascent prickle of unease, which I rationalized as purely academic curiosity, I delved deeper. Days blurred into a focused trance. I found more such aberrations. In a volume of botanical sketches, ostensibly detailing local flora, I discovered a series of marginal illustrations. They weren't monsters, not explicitly, but something about their implied movement, their silent mimicry of human form, made my skin crawl. They were always depicted near the water, their presence clinging to the edges of the otherwise innocuous drawings of sea lavender and dune grass. Then came the gaps. In a meticulously kept family tree, detailing generations of Blackwoods, an entire branch, spanning from 1850 to 1870, was simply absent. Not merely empty, but erased. A heavy ink had been applied over the names and dates, not to obscure them entirely, but to render them illegible, a deliberate act of redaction. Why would a family so obsessed with its lineage, so fastidious in its record-keeping, obliterate a 20-year period of its own history? The dust motes, dancing in the fading light, seemed to swirl with purpose, and the scent of old paper began to take on a sharper, more metallic edge, like the taste of rust on the tongue. My initial academic zeal was now laced with a different kind of intensity. This wasn't merely forgotten lore, it was suppressed lore. The Blackwoods hadn't just neglected their history, they had actively pruned it, leaving behind only tantalizing, unsettling fragments. Each cryptic entry, each unsettling illustration, each unsettling gap was a thread, pulling me deeper into a labyrinth I hadn't realized I was entering. I was no longer merely a historian. I was a decipherer of secrets, and the secrets of Oakhaven felt ancient, predatory, and very much alive. The unsettling script of the Blackwood Journal clung to my thoughts, a discordant melody in the quiet hum of academic pursuit. The tide demands, the deep receives, the price is paid in waking sleeps. The words echoed, cold and sharp, severing the thin tether of my purely intellectual curiosity. This was no longer just history. It felt like a premonition, a whisper from the very foundations of this decaying town. I left the manor, drawn by an inexplicable urge to witness Oakhaven beyond the Blackwood's walls. The air outside was a bitter caress, thick with the scent of salt and decay, a metallic tang of brine that seemed to scour the inside of my nose. The narrow streets, cobbled and slick with perpetual dampness, wound between buildings that sagged like forgotten monuments. Paint peeled from clapboard facades in curling strips, revealing the gray, weathered wood beneath, as if the very structures were shedding their skin. The town itself was a study in stillness. A few figures moved with a peculiar, deliberate slowness, their gazes averted, their shoulders hunched against more than just the wind. I entered a general store, its bell a rusty clang that seemed to startle the very dust motes in the air. The proprietor, a man whose face was a roadmap of deep-set lines and whose eyes held the dull sheen of old glass, barely acknowledged my presence. My eyes scanned the shelves, past jars of brined vegetables and dusty tins, landing on a small, hand-bound pamphlet titled Oakhaven's Deep Roots. I picked it up, its paper brittle beneath my fingers. Interesting history, this town, I ventured, hoping to elicit more than a grunt. The proprietor's gaze, previously fixed on some unseen point beyond the counter, slowly drifted to me. History, he repeated, the word drawn out, or memory. Some things don't fade with the turning of pages, stranger. They linger, under the bay, in the blood. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, then turned back to his unseen focus, his face a mask of weary indifference. I purchased the pamphlet, my fingers trembling slightly as I paid. Outside, the fog, a spectral presence began to roll in from the bay, blurring the edges of the world. I walked towards the docks, the pamphlet clutched in my hand, its cryptic title now feeling less like local charm and more like a grim declaration. The docks were a skeletal network of rotting wood, barnacle-encrusted pilings groaning under the unseen weight of the tide. The fishing boats, few and far between, bobbed with an unnerving lethargy, their paint faded, their nets frayed. Here, the silence was even more profound, broken only by the mournful cry of gulls and the relentless slap of water against wood. As I surveyed the gray expanse of the bay, a sudden disorienting flicker warped my perception. For a terrifying, elongated moment, the familiar salt-blasted docks dissolved. The fog thinned, revealing not the churning gray waters, but a vast, silent expanse of polished linoleum. Towering above me, gleaming and metallic, were rows of motionless escalators, stretching upwards into a sterile, cavernous space. Then, as abruptly as it appeared, the hallucination fractured, rippled, and the docks reasserted themselves, solid and real, though my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The experience left me profoundly shaken, questioning the very fabric of my senses, wondering if the town's strange miasma was already seeping into my mind. I forced myself to focus on the pamphlet, dismissed as quaint tales of old, described a force beneath the bay, a sleeper that awoke with the changing tides. Far deeper than the coastal air settled into my bones. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a ledger, an accounting of a grim cyclical sacrifice. The Blackwoods hadn't just settled Oakhaven. They had bound it to something ancient, something hungry, something that still stirred beneath the fog-shrouded bay. The chill that had settled into my bones was not merely the damp coastal air. It was the cold touch of a truth too grim to bear, a truth that had begun to coalesce from the fragmented whispers of Oakhaven's past. Then, the shift. The familiar scent of aged paper and sea salt vanished, replaced by the sterile, recycled air of an immense silent space. No other soul stirred. The motionless escalators rose like petrified waterfalls, their metal teeth glinting under the artificial glare, inviting no ascent, offering no escape. I tried to move, to call out, but my limbs felt weighted, my throat constricted. This was a place of transit, yet all movement had ceased. It was not merely empty, it felt emptied, as if life itself had been siphoned away, leaving only the husk of its architecture. A profound sense of being watched, of being held in an invisible gaze, prickled the nape of my neck. The concourse stretched, an infinite corridor of waiting, and I was the sole passenger, stranded in a terminal designed for departures that would never come. This was the waking sleep, I realized. The price. I jolted upright, gasping, the taste of stale air in my mouth. My own room, draped in the pre-dawn gloom, slowly solidified around me. The dream, if it could be called that, clung to me like a shroud, its vast, sterile emptiness more terrifying than any phantom. The silent hum of the concourse still resonated in my ears. It was a premonition, a warning, or perhaps a glimpse into the labyrinth of Oakhaven's collective mind. I had to find the source. I had to understand the ledger. Clad in the same clothes I'd worn to sleep, I descended to the library. The manor, still slumbering, groaned softly around me. Each floorboard creaked beneath my weight, a protest against my intrusion. The air in the library was thick, laden with the scent of decay and forgotten stories. I ignored the more prominent, leather-bound volumes, drawn instead to a smaller, unassuming ledger tucked away behind a row of maritime charts. The title, etched in a spidery, almost frantic hand, read simply, "The Deep Below, a Chronicle of Tribute." My fingers trembled as I opened it. The first few pages detailed mundane family affairs, faded ink describing births, deaths, and harvests. But then, abruptly, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew erratic, sprawling across the page, sometimes pressing so hard the paper was torn. The author, a Blackwood patriarch named Silas, writing in the early 1900s, described not harvests, but yields. The coastal fog, thick and cloying, carried the scent of its desire. I felt its tendrils brush against my mind, testing the edges of my resolve. Silas detailed strange rituals performed under the full moon, near the treacherous Blackwood Bay. He spoke of the offerings, of the appeasement, and of the quiet ones who were chosen. He never explicitly described the sacrifices. He tried to warn the others. Foolish. The deep does not permit dissent. He was among the quiet ones last month. A small price, perhaps, for the years of bounty. My breath hitched. This was it. Silas Blackwood, one of Oakhaven's revered founders, was not merely documenting a local superstition. He was an active participant, a willing purveyor of human tribute. He was sacrificing his own kin, his own townspeople, to some unseen, malevolent force. The waking sleeps weren't just a consequence. They were part of the process, a way of preparing the quiet ones for their grim fate. The journal continued, its pages filled with increasingly deranged observations. His obsession with the deep below was complete, his sanity utterly consumed. The cycle continues. The final entry, dated 1917, read, "The town prospers, the fog rolls in, and the hunger grows. I have done my part. My son understands the burden." The air in the library suddenly felt impossibly heavy, suffocating. And the last entry, "He will ensure the legacy endures," echoed not as a historical footnote, but as a present terrifying threat. I was entangled, deeply and irrevocably, in the Blackwood legacy, and the deep, I realized, was already calling for its next tribute. I closed the journal, the brittle hide cold and clammy beneath my fingers. I was a vessel, perhaps, or a target for the currents that stirred beneath Oakhaven. The thrum, a sound I had come to associate with the profound, unsettling silence of profound isolation, now seemed to possess a subtle, rhythmic quality. I strained my ears, tilting my head, convinced the old manor itself was sighing, or perhaps the sea beyond the fog-shrouded bay was speaking in tongues. But the sound seemed to originate not from the walls, nor the distant surf, but from a deeper, more internal space. It was a murmur, formless and fleeting, a language I almost understood, then lost. I pushed the journal away, its revelations too close, too demanding. My gaze drifted to the library window, where the persistent fog usually obscured all but the nearest gnarled branches. But tonight, for a fleeting moment, the gray veil thinned, and I saw it. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the vision dissolved, swallowed by the returning, impenetrable mist. They were like countless tiny voices, submerged and distorted, yet undeniably present. They spoke of depths, of waiting, of a peculiar kind of hunger. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to clear the echoing chamber of my skull, but the sound was insistent, a pressure building behind my eyes. I felt a strange pull, a yearning not my own towards the unseen waters. Sleep, when it finally claimed me, offered no sanctuary. Instead, it plunged me into a landscape of stark, unsettling familiarity. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, though no sea was visible, only the distant, unreachable gates. They were clearer here, sharper, no longer a murmur but a chorus, speaking my name, twisting it into something foreign and ancient. Then the concourse dissolved, yielding to the true horror of the dream. Shapes moved in the periphery of my vision, massive and slow, their forms hinted at by the faint glow, but never fully revealed. They were too large for any creature known, too ancient, their movements deliberate, patient. I felt their gaze, heavy and unblinking, upon me. The entity beneath the bay, a theoretical construct just days ago, was now reaching for me directly, its tendrils of influence coiling around my mind. The ancient wood of the library shelves around me began to warp, the familiar spines of forgotten tomes blurring into a dizzying kaleidoscope of shapes. The scent of aged paper and dust, usually a comforting perfume, curdled into something metallic, saline, like the tang of a forgotten tide pool. My vision swam, the ornate patterns of the ceiling morphing into the vast skeletal ribs of some enormous desolate structure. When the world solidified again, the transformation was complete. The high, arching windows, meant to offer views of distant runways, now showed only a uniform, impenetrable gray, like a canvas coated in thick, wet ash. The air here was still and cold, carrying a faint industrial tang mingled with that persistent, briny whisper. This was not the library. This was not Oakhaven. Yet it felt undeniably real, more solid than the ancestral manor I had left moments, or perhaps hours ago. The vast expanse of polished tile stretched before me, reflecting the dull overhead lights in an endless, distorted shimmer. Had I fallen asleep? I pinched the skin on my forearm, a sharp, undeniable sting that failed to break the illusion. The concourse remained, immutable, vast, and terrifyingly vacant. Their teeth-like steps seemed to watch me, a silent mechanical maw. I imagined the faint metallic groan of their unseen gears, the ghost of countless footsteps that had once ascended and descended. Then, a sound. Not the hum, but something else. A faint scraping, like stone against rough fabric, or perhaps the dragging of something immense across a distant, unseen floor. It was too soft to pinpoint, too elusive to confirm, yet it was there, a ragged edge against the perfect stillness. Nothing. The sense of being watched intensified, a prickling awareness that crawled across my scalp, settling heavily on my nape. Each step I took seemed to amplify the scraping sound, bringing it closer, or perhaps bringing me closer to its source. My own breathing grew ragged, loud in the suffocating quiet. I tried to reason, to anchor myself. Reid, you are a scholar. This is a delusion. The rational part of my mind, usually a fortress of logic, felt porous, riddled with cracks through which the strange, the impossible, seeped in. I began to hear whispers, faint and indistinct, riding the currents of the cold air. They were not words I could discern, merely a sibilant murmur, like the hiss of 1,000 distant waves, or the rustle of dry leaves in a wind that did not exist. My hands clenched into fists, my knuckles white. Was this the Blackwood family's legacy? My heart lurched, a frantic drum against my ribs. I froze, my eyes fixed on the spot. The fluorescent glow of that imagined concourse, a sterile, ceaseless light, pressed against my temples. The motionless escalators, their metal teeth bared and unmoving, stretched upwards into an unseen ceiling, downwards into a veiled floor. They hummed with an unheard potential, a promise of motion forever denied. I stood there, caught between floors, between worlds, the distant, hollow echo of a forgotten announcement still vibrating in the cold, thin air. My own breath, a shallow, rattling sound, felt too loud in that vast, silent space. The Blackwood journals, their ink-stained secrets now a part of me, had etched this phantom landscape into my consciousness. A place where time stalled and the future felt irrevocably sealed. The scent of ancient paper and salt-laden dust was immediate, not imagined. My fingers, though still numb from the journal's touch, were clamped around the worn leather. The fear was a living thing, yes, but my academic curiosity, twisted now into a desperate need for understanding, was sharper. I had to know. My gaze swept the room, no longer searching for narratives, but for an entrance. The cryptic maps, folded within the last journal, pulsed in my memory. They weren't precise schematics, but abstract sketches, hinting at a convergence point where the manor's oldest foundations met the encroaching earth, almost directly beneath the main hearth. I moved with a sudden, almost frantic energy, the imagined concourse receding, replaced by the creak of floorboards underfoot. The grand fireplace, a monument of blackened stone, dominated the far wall. Its mantelpiece, laden with forgotten trinkets and sea-worn curios, seemed to watch me with vacant eyes. I ran my hands over the rough-hewn stones, searching for a seam, a faint outline, anything that suggested an opening. No mechanism, no hidden lever. The journals had also mentioned the ancient current, a subtle flow of air that signaled the proximity of the passage. Nothing but the faint groan of the house settling. I crawled closer, my face almost touching the floor, inhaling the faint scent of ash and damp earth that clung to the crevices. It carried with it the distinct tang of brine, even here, deep within the manor. My eyes narrowed, tracing the lines of the flagstones. One section, directly in front of the hearth, seemed to sit fractionally lower than the others. With renewed vigor, I pushed against it, then pulled, then felt along its edges for purchase. My fingers brushed against a tiny, almost invisible indentation. I pressed, and with a low, grinding groan that seemed to echo from the very bones of the house, a section of the flagstone floor, perhaps 3 feet square, began to sink. Dust, thick and ancient, puffed into the air, carrying with it the scent of undisturbed earth and something else. A metallic, coppery tang that made my stomach churn. A gaping blackness yawned before me, a raw, unlit maw in the floor. The air that now flowed freely from it was heavy, damp, and rich with the smell of wet stone and something vaguely organic, like decaying seaweed mixed with old blood. A set of crudely carved stone steps, slick with moisture, descended into the gloom. I retrieved the sturdy lantern I'd found in the manor's pantry, its beam cutting a trembling arc through the dust-filled air. Each step I took down the rough-hewn stairs was deliberate, testing the slick surface, my hand scraping against the damp, cold stone wall. The sounds of the manor faded, replaced by the faint, rhythmic sloshing of water, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to come from far below, yet vibrated through the very stone I touched. The stairs ended abruptly, opening into a chamber of immense, unsettling proportions. The lantern's beams struggled against the vastness, revealing only segments of the space. The walls were not carved stone, but raw, unhewn earth, shored up by massive ancient timbers that groaned under the immense weight above. Water seeped from the ceiling in slow, persistent drips, collecting in shallow, brackish pools on the uneven floor. In the center of the chamber, bathed in the trembling light, stood an altar. It was not a grand, ornate structure, but a colossal single slab of black, sea-polished stone, its surface scarred with intricate, non-Euclidean carvings that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of my perception. Around it, arranged with a disturbing precision, were artifacts. Crude, almost primitive, yet imbued with an unmistakable malevolence. Some clutched miniature, barnacle-encrusted anchors. Others, small, rusted chains. On the altar itself, resting in a shallow depression, was a single immense conch shell, larger than my head. Its inner whorls glowed faintly in the lantern light, a pale, sickly green. Beside it, a collection of smooth, obsidian-like stones, each one perfectly round, each one bearing a single, deep indentation. They felt warm to the touch, almost feverish. And there, etched into the altar's surface, deeply scored and stained, was a symbol I recognized from the journals. A spiraling vortex, terminating in 3 concentric circles. The very mark the Blackwoods had used to denote the ancient current. The sleeping hunger. My breath hitched. This was it. Tangible proof. The artifacts, the altar, the pervasive, almost living dampness, the constant rhythmic slosh of unseen water. It all coalesced into a horrifying, undeniable truth. This wasn't just folklore. It was a living, breathing testament to generations of worship, a grim legacy passed down through blood. The Blackwoods hadn't merely documented a local legend. They had served it. And I, Reid, had stumbled directly into the heart of their devotion, into the depths below where the true nature of Oakhaven's affliction lay bare. My breath hitched, a ragged tear in the thick, humid air of the hidden chamber. This was it. Tangible proof. The truth, cold and slick as the cavern walls, had finally uncoiled itself around my heart. My academic curiosity, once a shield of detached inquiry, had shattered. I was a fly caught in the web, the silken strands tightening with every beat of my frantic pulse. I backed away from the altar, my hand brushing against a rough, cold stone, the texture of ancient, forgotten terror. I fled the manor's depths, not with the hurried steps of fear, but with a deliberate, almost dreamlike motion, as if my body moved independently of my horrified mind. The grand, decaying halls of the Blackwood estate, once merely atmospheric, now hummed with a malevolent resonance, a silent echo of the unspeakable acts performed beneath its foundations. Oakhaven itself seemed transformed. The usual melancholic quiet had deepened into something else, a profound stillness that was more unsettling than any clamor. The few figures I saw on the cobbled streets moved with a strange, synchronized grace, their steps unnaturally soft, their gazes fixed on some distant, unseen point. There was no casual chatter, no children's cries, only the rhythmic sigh of the bay and the rustle of the wind through skeletal trees. I needed to escape, to find a way out of this town that had swallowed me whole. It was a folly, he'd called it, a grand design that withered before it could bloom, left to rot like a beached leviathan. My desperate hope, a fragile thing, clung to the thought that this forgotten place might offer an untended path away from the town's encroaching madness. I found it on the outskirts, beyond the last cluster of salt-bleached cottages, where the paved road abruptly widened into a cracked, overgrown expanse. But it was not empty. A low, guttural hum, a sound like a distant, mournful foghorn, vibrated in the air. It drew me forward, a morbid curiosity overriding my instinct for flight. Through a shattered panel, I peered inside. The concourse was vast, cavernous, bathed in the gray, diffused light that filtered through the grime-streaked skylights. And within it, arrayed in a vast, silent congregation, were the townspeople of Oakhaven. They stood, hundreds of them, their forms indistinct in the gloom, facing the far wall where the boarding gates should have been. Their faces, as far as I could discern, were utterly blank, devoid of individual expression, yet imbued with a terrifying, unified intensity. They swayed, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like kelp in an unseen current. Their arms, at irregular intervals, rose and fell in unison, not in a wave, but in a slow, almost reverent gesture, as if tracing an invisible arc in the air. It was not a song, nor a chant, but a pure, unadulterated tone, vibrating with an ancient aquatic resonance that settled deep within my own chest, threatening to synchronize with my heartbeat. On the dusty, cracked floor, between the rows of abandoned check-in counters, I saw them. Crude drawings, etched with fingers or sticks, depicting swirling patterns, spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward, and strange, angular figures that could have been distorted fish or impossibly ancient glyphs. The air here was heavy with the same metallic sweet scent I'd found in the manor's depths, a cloying perfume that clung to the silent, swaying crowd. They were utterly still, monuments to a journey that would never be taken. But the people below moved, or rather, were moved, by some invisible current, some collective tide. This wasn't just a gathering. It was a manifestation. The entity's control was not merely suggestion or influence. It was overt, absolute. Their minds, their wills, had been subsumed, dissolved into a singular, grotesque consciousness. They were not individuals anymore, but limbs of a larger, unseen body, performing a silent, horrifying ballet for an unseen master. Oakhaven was not just corrupt. It was consumed. And I, the interloper, the historian who sought forgotten lore, was now trapped within its living nightmare. My own mind already humming with the faint, insidious echo of their collective madness. The path out, if it ever existed, now felt utterly, irrevocably lost. This was it. Tangible proof. As the final, terrible understanding began to bloom in my mind, the chamber itself seemed to writhe. The rough-hewn stone walls wavered, losing their solid definition, shimmering like heat haze over a distant road. The air, heavy with salt and decay, thinned and grew unnaturally dry, tasting of dust and stale metal. The rhythmic slosh, which had been a constant, oppressive pulse, grew distant, then vanished, replaced by an echoing, cavernous silence that pressed in on my ears until they ached. The next, the world had rearranged itself around me with a jarring, disorienting snap. The motionless escalators, their silver teeth frozen in an endless climb, rose up into a higher, unseen level, monuments to journeys begun but never completed. My own reflection, a pale, bewildered figure, stared back from the polished surfaces, a stranger in this alien landscape. This was not real, I knew. Or rather, it was a reality warped, stretched thin by the sheer weight of what I had uncovered. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, now snapped into place with sickening clarity. The entity beneath the bay, the one the Blackwoods had called the Sleeper, did not simply exist. It cycled. A slow, agonizing cosmic breath. Then a stirring, a hunger, a gradual awakening that seeped into the very water, the very air of Oakhaven. This was when the madness began, a creeping tendril around the minds of the inhabitants, preparing them for the tribute. The Blackwood family, those reclusive historians and keepers of forgotten lore, were not merely chroniclers. They were the entity's devoted stewards, its ancient, unholy priesthood. Their meticulous archives, their obsessive record-keeping, were not for posterity, but for perpetuating the cycle. They identified the catalysts, the outsiders, the innocents drawn into Oakhaven by some cruel twist of fate, whose minds were particularly susceptible to the entity's insidious pull. They documented the rituals, the specific timing, the precise methods of coaxing the sleeper back into its slumber, sated for another age. And I was the latest catalyst, the scholar drawn by the promise of forgotten lore, the reclusive historian perfectly isolated, perfectly focused. My initial academic curiosity, my very determination to unravel Oakhaven's grim history, had been nothing more than the entity's lure, a carefully laid trap. The project was never about cataloging the Blackwood Library. It was about cataloging me, preparing me. I was a pawn, a carefully selected piece in a game played across millennia, a sacrifice wrapped in the guise of intellectual pursuit. The entity's hunger wasn't for mere flesh, not for blood in the visceral sense. It craved consciousness, the intricate tapestry of human thought and emotion. The town wasn't just affected by the entity. It was its larder, its living, breathing tribute. It was the sound of a closing door, the hushed reverence before a final act. My historian's mind, which had once reveled in discovering hidden truths, now recoiled from this one, screaming for a way out. But there was no exit visible, no departure gate, only the sterile, echoing expanse. I understood the trap. I understood my role. The cycle was complete, and I was at its heart. The question then was not if I was meant to be the offering, but if an offering could refuse. This was it. Tangible proof. My historian's detachment, once a shield, shattered into 1,000 shards of terror. The world, as I knew it, was a fragile veneer over an unimaginable depth. A chill, not of temperature, but of profound wrongness, seeped into my bones, originating not from the chamber's damp stone, but from the silence that followed my realization. It wasn't merely wet. It gleamed with a viscous sheen, reflecting the faint, flickering light of the single lantern I carried in distorted, elongated pools. Then, a sound. So subtle it was almost a memory of a sound. A soft, collective sigh, like wind through dead reeds. I turned slowly, my muscles protesting, to face the chamber's entrance. The elder stood at their forefront, his eyes, usually sharp and knowing, now glazed with a placid, terrifying emptiness. No menace in their stance, no aggression in their collective gaze, only a profound, silent invitation. They simply watched me, their faces pale, their lips slightly parted as if awaiting a cue. The air in the chamber, already heavy, grew denser, pressing against my eardrums. The light from my lantern warped, stretching into elongated, ghostly fingers that danced on the indistinct forms of the townspeople. Without a word, without a gesture, they began to move, a slow, synchronized procession. The world around me twisted, the rough-hewn stone giving way to a strange, disorienting expanse. The vast, cavernous space stretched before me, illuminated by an eerie, artificial glow from long, flickering fluorescent tubes recessed in the high ceiling. The motionless escalators, twin gray ribbons of steel and rubber, ascended into a gloom that promised nothing but further emptiness. It was a place designed for transit, for movement, for escape. Yet here it stood, frozen, a stage for something utterly static and inescapable. The townspeople, a silent phalanx, fanned out across the concourse, their gazes still fixed on me, their expressions unreadable. I fought it, a desperate internal struggle against the unseen current. My mind screamed for logic, for an explanation. but there was none. This was beyond the rational, beyond any history I had ever cataloged. This was the raw, primal core of Oakhaven's madness, finally laid bare. My feet dragged, each step an act of immense effort, yet I continued to advance towards the Elder, towards the motionless escalator. And with it, a presence, vast and formless, began to assert itself. It was not a physical manifestation, not a creature of flesh and bone, but a colossal emptiness, a profound hunger that filled the concourse, pressing down on me, on the silent townspeople, on everything. My vision swam, the flickering lights of the concourse blurring into streaks of white. And then I understood. The journals, the maps, the legends, they all spoke of a cyclical tribute, a bargain struck with the deep. The offering was not merely a thing, it was a connection, a surrender, a perpetuation. And I, Reid, the observer, the historian, had been drawn into the terrible heart of it. My intellect, my determination, my very identity were the final, exquisite ingredients in this ancient ritual. The entity was not asking for a sacrifice. It was asking for an inclusion. It was asking for me to become part of the cycle I had sought to merely observe. The humming reached a deafening crescendo, a sound that was no longer external but internal, vibrating within my skull. I could feel the immense ancient hunger reaching for me, not with tendrils or claws, but with a profound, irresistible pull, dissolving the boundaries of myself. I was not falling. I was being drawn, absorbed, into the inevitable offering. I felt a whisper, not of sound, but of presence, slithering through the humid air, wrapping around my thoughts like cold, slick tendrils. It was less a voice, and more a profound understanding, an invasive consciousness pouring into the hollows of my mind. You know, you see, you are part of the tide. My world tilted, the chamber's rough-hewn walls blurred, the crude altar a smear of gray. A profound vertigo seized me, not of the body, but of the soul. I was falling, not through space, but through layers of self, shedding my identity like old skin. Then, a sudden jarring shift. The damp, enclosed space vanished. I was no longer in the earth's belly, but suspended in a vast, echoing emptiness. Above me, an immense, arched ceiling stretched into a hazy distance, crisscrossed with skeletal girders. The air here was sterile, devoid of Oakhaven's pervasive decay, yet it held a deeper, more profound stillness. The polished floor gleamed, reflecting nothing but the muted glow. A path offered, but denied. A promise of elevation, of departure, that would never be fulfilled. Each step, each handrail, was coated in a fine, almost invisible layer of dust, a testament to time's passage without life's intervention. My own breath, when I finally dared to draw it, sounded impossibly loud in the cavernous space, a ragged gasp that seemed to shatter the profound quietude. Where was I? Was this a dream? A fragment of a dying mind? The vastness of the concourse, the sheer unmoving potential of it, was more terrifying than any cramped chamber. It was the horror of absolute stasis, of an endpoint masquerading as a beginning. There was no escape. This place, this symbol of transit, was as much a prison as Oakhaven itself. A low hum, almost imperceptible, began to resonate through the floor. A vibration that grew steadily, not a sound of machinery, but of something deeper, older. It called to me, a deep, resonant summons that bypassed my ears and settled directly into my bones. The sterile light began to waver, flickering with a sickly greenish tint. The gleaming floor seemed to ripple, mirroring the unseen waters of the bay. And in that moment, I understood. My journey had ended not in escape, but in absorption. I opened my eyes, or perhaps I simply became aware again, the vast concourse fading like a forgotten dream. I was standing, or kneeling, on the rough, damp stone of the hidden chamber once more. The air was heavy with the familiar cloying scent of brine and damp earth, but now it felt less alien, less threatening. It felt natural. Or was it my heart echoing its beat? The Blackwood Manor still stood, a sentinel of decay. And the entity, the ancient hunger beneath the waves, persisted. It had always persisted. It would always persist. I was not an outsider anymore. I was not a historian cataloging forgotten lore. I was part of the lore. My mind, once a vessel of academic curiosity, was now a conduit, a receptor for the enduring cyclical truth of Oakhaven. I saw the town's inhabitants, not as victims, but as components of a larger, terrible mechanism. And I, Reid, the reclusive historian, was now a cog in that machine. The cycle would continue, the tides would turn, and the hunger would be fed. I was determined, yes, determined to bear witness, determined to understand, not as a scholar, but as a silent, willing participant. The echo of Oakhaven was not just a sound, it was a resonance within me, a part of the enduring, inescapable horror. And it was beautiful, in its own terrible way.